Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay, my name is Kartika. He is Irul and she is Zima. We are from first group. And today we will present about varieties of language. And the first who will be delivered by Zima.
Okay, so today we will talk about varieties of language from chapter 2 from the book Sociolinguistic Cambridge Textbook in Linguist, second editions by L.A. Hudson. So in this first session there will be two parts with me. The first one is introductions. We will talk about linguistic items, variety of language, and speech communities. In language section we will talk about language and dialect, standard language, and the family tree model. First, introduction. What exactly linguistic items? Linguistic items is individual parts of language. For example, lexical items like words, phrases, and clauses in a language. And in sounds, usually we can find it. We already learned about sounds in phonology, and after that, grammatical constructions in morphology. And the example of linguistic items. An example of linguistic items is this one. The suffix "ing" of the written English is pronounced with two different ways. The first one is "ing," and then the second one is "in." So, for example, like in "coming" and "coming." So there are two different pronunciations here that usually people that speak English use, whether they pronounce it with "in" or with "ing." So both phonemes are different linguistic items, and both of them have different social distributions. For example, the social distribution of the first one with "ing" is a typical standard pronunciations in English, while the second one is a typical non-standard pronunciations. In another example, in English dialects of England, the most widespread past tense for catch. There are two. Catch with "ed" at the back of it, and then after that, caught, which is a different form. So, while the standard dialect, these two past tense forms are different language items as well. And then the second one is variety of language. What exactly variety of language? It's a set of linguistic items with similar social distributions. For example, American English, British English, Australian English, Canadian English, and many more. So, if we can assume that English is English, then the variety of language of English is American British, American English, and British English. So, what is the difference between American English and British English? Usually we can find it in vocabulary. For example, people in UK usually call cookies biscuits, and then in American English they usually call it cookies or chips. it fries, while crisps, they call it potato chips. So this is actually the difference between American English and British English in a point of view of lexical item. And then after that, we will talk about speech community. So in the book that we have read, there are a lot of different definitions about speech community. There are actually no exact fixed definitions about what exactly is speech community. So we can, I will provide you three definitions from three different people about speech community. The first one is from John Lyons. All the people who speech community is all the people who use a given language or dialects. From Charles Hockett, he said that each language defines a speech community. The whole set of people who communicate with each other, either directly or indirectly, via the common language. While Marcelina H. Morgan, with her book Speech Communities, said that speech communities is a group that shares values, attitudes about language use, varieties, and practices. So and there's actually a lot of more definitions about speech communities, but if I can summarize all of them, I think that we can assume that speech community is a group of people who have something in common linguistically. And you, as an individual in society, belong to different types of social communities. We can say that our family is our speech community because we interact with them using language as a tool of communications. And then after that, with your peers, with your friends, with your workmates, and so on. And we go to the second part of the sessions is language. We will talk about language, dialect, and standard language, and how to distinguish between them. So, language. Of course, we already know language. Language is a tool of communications, but we also can divide language as a collection of dialects. And then after that, dialects is a form of language, which means it is actually a sub-part of language that specific region or social group use. So, I will give you an example. So, for example, in English, English as a language, they have lots of varieties, like American English, British English, Canadian English, and so on. And then after that, American English have their own subparts, which is what we call as dialects. Like, for example, in Canadian English has two different dialects: Atlantic Canadian English and Standard Canadian English. And then after that, Atlantic Canadian English has Cape Breton English, Lundberg English, and Newfoundland English. And those are actually the subparts of variety, or what we usually call as dialects. Now, we need to know to understand more about what exactly language, what exactly dialects, we need to know the difference between language and dialect for English speakers especially. So there are three ways for you to distinguish between the language and dialect. So the first one is from the size. We already know that language is actually far much more bigger than dialects, because dialects is part of a language. So, and then we can see from the prestige point of view, which is a fact that we need to know that a language having a prestige which a dialect lacks. So dialect didn't have prestige. So if we apply the terms in this sense, standard English, for example, the kind of English that we use in the textbooks, for example, is not a dialect, but it is a language. But the varieties which are not used in formal writings, usually in speaking, is what we usually call as dialects. And then the last one is mutual interlegibility. So mutual interlegibility, to distinguish between language and dialect is based on notions, based on belief of mutual intelligibility. Dialects of the same language should be mutually intelligible, easy to understand, while different languages are not. This mutual intelligibility, in turn, will then be a reflection of the similarities between the different varieties of speech. But what we need to understand is that these three ways of differencing between language and dialect still give us problems. So there's still a lot of arguments whether we can tell the difference between language and dialects. And then we move on to the standard language. So standard language, we already know that dialect is part of language. So for people in the town, for example, or people in the nations, to find a standard language where everyone can use it, where it is actually a language that they consider as in the right form, they need a standardization. It is a process of agreement between all of the speakers of the language, and then after that it will influence the selected language to become a standard language. So there are actually several steps of standardizations. The first one is selection. So the first thing first is we need to select the language, the dialect, I mean. So a particular variety must have been selected as the one to be developed into a standard language. So first you need to select the dialects. And then after that, it could be from the existing variety, or you can be a combination between various dialects. And then the second one is codifications. Codifications mean, for example, in the nations, we have some agencies such as academy. For example, like Oxford, like Cambridge University, they have their own dictionary, and they list a lot of lexical items, and these lexical items become part of the standard language that English speakers use. So written dictionaries and grammar books actually fix the variety and actually help to create a standard language. And then the third steps will be elaboration of functions. So the selected dialects must have functions that associated with central government and with writing. For example, in parliament and law courts, in bureautics, educational and scientific documents of all kinds, and of course in various forms of literature. And then the last one is acceptance. So the dialect must be accepted by all the speakers, for example, in a specific nations or between nations in order to become a standard language. And last but not least, the family tree model. So, what exactly family tree model? So, family tree model is actually a way to describe the relationships among varieties in the terms of family tree model, which was developed in the 19th century as an aid in historical study language in order to find out the relationships, the history relationship between each language. They create this way called the family tree model. So in here, we can see that English actually related to German and also almost closely related to Welsh and French, but it is actually really far related with Chinese, some sort of like that. I think that's all. I think that's the end of the first sessions. The second and the third speaker will be Kartika and Khairul to explain to you the rest of the chapter. Thank you.
Okay. Next, I will talk about dialects, regional dialects, and isoglosses, diffusion and web theory, social dialects, types of linguistic items, registers and dialects, and the last diglossia. And Irul will explain about mixture of varieties, code switching, code mixing, borrowing, pigeons, creoles, and conclusions. Okay, it's about dialects again, but it's only about regional dialects and isoglosses. So in here, the easier way to distinguish dialects or regional dialects is based on their geography. So in here regional dialect is the geographical distribution of linguistic item or a different form of language spoken in a specific geographical area, or in the simple way, regional dialect is a different form of language spoken in a specific geographical area. And the next is about isoglosses. People who study about regional dialects, we can call it dialectologists. And when the dialectologists organize regional dialect on a map showing which item were found in which village, and then the dialect geographer draw a line between the area where one item was found and area where other were found. That boundary for each area called isogloss. Iso, same, and gloss, tongue. It's like same tongue. So isogloss is the boundary for each area where one linguistic item was found and areas where other were found. Okay, next. Next is diffusion and the wave theory. The situation when there is change in language spread outward from centers of influence to the surrounding areas is called the wave theory, or in much way same like the wave spreads from the place where a stone is dropped into a pool. And here is the example. When in some area like United States, pronunciation of word like farm with R is currently replacing the pronunciation without R. And the next about social dialect. There are two main sources of extra problem in dialect. First, geographical mobility. That it means when people move from one place to another, taking their dialect with them even if they modify them in the course of time to fit their new surrounding. And the second point is the fact that geography is not the only one relevant factors. There are other factors like social class, sex, and age. This point pointing out that there are linguistic difference between speakers which are due to not only to geography but also to other social factors. We will talk about social dialect and accent in the next slide. Next. So, social dialect is a variety of language connect with particular social class. social dialect refer to non-regional difference. It's because of these other factors, a speaker may be more similar in language to people from the same social group in different area than to people from different social group in the same area. So it's about what I'm talking about. Accent is referring to nothing but pronunciation. So accent is only take care about pronunciation, and dialect is referring to every other aspect of language that Zima was explained before. And the next about types of linguistic item. So types of linguistic item is like pronunciation, morphology, syntax, and vocabulary. And they are have different roles by themselves. It's like when we use pronunciation, it's to identify our origins, and then we might use morphology, syntax, vocabulary in order to identify our current status in society. For the example, is like when we have high education, we will use different language than people that have not go to study. And next, register. So, refer to CSER 1992, register is varieties according to use, and dialect is varieties according to user. It means these differences is needed because the same person may use very different linguistic item to express more or less the same meaning on different occasion. In simple way, we may say that dialect show who or what you are, while you register show what you are doing. And for the example is when, for instance, in writing one letter, a person makes that I'm writing to inform you that blah blah blah. But in another, the same person might write, I just want to tell you something like that. And there are 3 general types of dimension to communication by Michael Halliday. First is field. Second is field is concerned with the purpose and the subject matter of the communication. Mode refer to the means by which communication takes place, by speech or by writing. And tenor depends on the relation between participants. For the example is when we make a letter, the 2 letter opening use tenor, one being impersonal or it's like informal and formal. That is the difference for tenor. Next, miss. And the next is diglosia. Diglosia is a situation when 2 different varieties of language spoken by the same speech community. The 2 varieties are normally called high and low. So in this, the example is like when people use only informal language in public occasion and use under normal or in everyday circumstance. For example, it's like when the language used at Arabic home is local version, and when in the university or in Moscow they use standard Arabic. So the glossia doesn't guarantee linguistic equality between poor and rich, but only the difference come out only in formal public occasion. And the next is about mixture of varieties will be delivered by Europe.
Okay, for the next slide, we can see the code switching. We start with code switching, which is the inevitable consequence of bilingualism, or more generally, multilingualism. And anyone who speaks more than one language is between them according to the circumstance is code switching. It is when speakers use a language which the other person can understand. And the next is code mixing. The point at which the language change corresponds to a point where the situation change either on its own or precisely because the language change. And an important question about the code mixing is what syntactic constraints apply to it. And attempts to answer this question have constituted one of the main points of contact over the last few years between sociolinguistic and non-social linguistic. Next. And the next is borrowing. Borrowing is the situation when one language to become part of the other language. An example is English vocabulary taken from Greek, Latin, French, and other language. And next is pidgin. Pidgin is a language that has developed from mixture of two languages. There is yet another way apart from code switching and borrowing in which varieties may get mixed up with each other, namely by the process of creating a new variety out of two or more existing ones. This process of variety synthesis may take a number of different forms, including, for instance, the creation of artificial auxiliary language like Esperanto and Basic English. Next. And next is Creoles. Creole is a pidgin that has become the first language of speakers. The process whereby a pidgin turns into a Creole is called Creolization. The example is language that forms to parent language mixed together into a new language. And the conclusion of our presentation is the first one: there are significant problems in determining one variety from another of the same type. And the second, there are serious problems in determining one type of variety from another language, from dialect or dialect, from register, or ordinary language, from Creoles, or Creoles from pidgin. And the third, the only acceptable way to solve these problems is to avoid the idea variety altogether as an analytical or theoretical concept, and focus instead on the individual linguistic item. Okay, that's all from our group. Maybe is there any question?
Okay, is there any question?
of the standard language. Yeah. So how do how do they choose one particular dialect to be their standard language? On the first process is selection, right? So how do they select the one particular dialects, one aspect, one criteria maybe?
Thank you.
Okay.
More questions? Novi?
My name is Novi Dayana from Grade 2. My question is it possible for standard language to change back into dialect?
Okay. Okay, we will start with
Thank you for the questions. Please wait for a moment for the answers.
Okay, the answer will be delivered by Zima and Irul. First, Zima.
Okay, so the first question is from Dia. The characteristic, what exactly the characteristics of standard language? And also there's a second question is from Alif. How do they choose dialects into the standard language? So actually we have the answers and we will explain both of the questions with one answers because they basically are related to each other. So in order for dialects to turn into a standard language, they need several characteristics. They need to fulfill several criteria in order to become a standard language that the language speaker will be uh, will will accept. So here Errol will tell you what exactly the characteristics of selected dialects to turn into a standard language. Errol, please.
Okay. For the answer is it is the variety of use by educated use. For example, those in the profession, the media, and so on. And the second, it is the variety defined defined in dictionary, dictionary, grammar, and use good. And the third is it is triggered as more correct and socially acceptable than other varieties. And the fourth is enjoy greater fresh physics than dialect and non-standard varieties. Non-standard varieties are felt to be the province of the less educated. And the fifth, it is used as a written language. And the last, it is used in important function in the society, in the government, the parliament, courts, bureau,
Capek dong gua. Kok dia getar gitu?
bureaucracy, education, literature, trade, and industry.
So that's the answer for Dia and Alif for Alif questions. Is that clear enough for both of you? Okay. So the third question is from Novi. So is it possible for standard language to change back into dialect? It is actually possible. They call it as so dialectization is actually the opposite of standardization. So, for example, in European context, for example, Scots, Low German, and Occitan have been standard language earlier before. So then after that, they are no longer part of the, they are no longer as the standard language. Instead, they go back into the dialect and tend to be regarded as the subordinate of English, High German, and French, respectively. So, that's the answer for the third question. Novi, is that clear enough for you? Okay, I think that's all from us, all of us. Thank you so much for all of your attentions. We hope that this information will help you to understand exactly varieties of language. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.